Hello and welcome to the Husband Help Haven podcast, where you'll learn how to be the best husband you can be, no matter what your marriage is like right now. This is your host, Stephen Waldo, and today we're going to kick off a two-part series on waiting during separation. We're going to talk about waiting during separation by posing two questions, both of which I get a fair amount. The first question, the one that we're going to be answering today, is how much longer until she comes back? Or at least, how much longer until this thing is over with? How much longer until I'm out of this marriage crisis? The second question that we'll be answering on next week's episode is, should you keep going? Should you keep waiting? We'll talk through some reasons why you should keep going, and some reasons that I've heard from other men for why they made the decision to be done. So, coming back to today, I get these questions a fair amount. They usually go a little something like this. Stephen, I know you can't tell me an exact time frame, but based on your experience, come on. How much longer do you think this thing's going to last? How much longer until she comes back? How much longer until she pushes through the divorce? Surely you can give me some sort of answer here, even if you can't tell me down to the day. And you're right. I can't give you that exact number. I can't tell you it's going to be, 6 more months, 13 days, 4 hours, and then that's going to be when this whole thing is done with and she's back or you're done or whatever. I can't tell you that. I can't give you that specific timeline. But what I can do, and I think that the most effective way that I can shed some light on this question for you, the unique listener who's in a unique situation with unique circumstances, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I know about the baseline average duration of most separations. And then from there, I can pose you a few questions that will help you determine whether you're going to fall on the long side of average, the short side of average, or maybe smack dab right in the middle. So, okay, let's get into it here. How much longer until your wife comes back to the marriage? I know why I get these questions all the time. It's because separation is hard. It's difficult. Marriage crisis is a grind, and every day is a struggle. And so if you could just have an idea of how much longer it was going to be, gosh, that'd be really nice to help you set some realistic expectations for yourself. If you knew that it was going to be another month versus another year, you could really, you'd approach that differently, right? If you knew it was going to be another year, for one, you might more seriously consider that question that we're going to answer in next week's episode of should I keep going? But for two, even if you do decide to keep going, which, I think a lot of you would and should, you're going to be able to have your expectations set differently. That, okay, I don't need to just survive a month. I need to really settle in here, figure out a way to survive this thing long term. I can't just treat this as a short little blip on my radar that's going to go away overnight or over a couple weeks. I need to settle in and kind of figure out how to build a way of life that's going to get me through a long separation. I'm sure that there are going to be guys who are going to listen to this and, I'm going to do a good job convincing you that you're in for a very long separation, and then a couple weeks from now, you're going to find that things are turning a corner one way or another. And similarly, there might be some guys that listen to this and say, oh man, I completely fit the bill for a very short separation, and you find that yours is lasting a little bit longer than you'd hoped. So in all of this, recognize that really what we're doing is kind of educated guessing. We can't read the future. We have no idea, and the truth is that a lot of it is out of our control. A lot of it is up to your wife and how quickly she decides to move through this process. And again, that can be true whether it's towards reconciliation or towards divorce. You only have so much agency in the speed of this separation. And oftentimes the only way that you can make it go faster is if you take on the mantle of the one pursuing divorce, because then you can push the process forward in that way. But again, that's not going to be where most of you listening to this are. So let's talk about duration. Again, like I said, I think that the most helpful place to start is talking about the average duration of a separation. How long does the average separation last? As I was thinking about how to establish this baseline, I went back and reviewed the research that I've gone through before. I made a lesson about a similar type of question in my course, Peace and Control, we talk in depth about how long do separations last, how long, what are the odds of remarriage after divorce, things like that. And what I found when I was doing research for that lesson is that, for one, there really is not that much data out there. There's not that much available on duration of separations. Really, there's not that much research into separations, period, if I'm being totally honest. But specifically for duration, we're really mostly limited to a couple of data sets. One of them comes all the way back from 2002 from a Department of Health and Human Services report. The other one comes from 2009. The Census Bureau every now and then releases a data analysis called Number, Timing, and Duration of Marriages and Divorces. They only release this every few years. I was actually really excited this past April, just a couple months ago, because they finally released their data set for 2016. And I was excited to look into it and get some updated numbers. They didn't talk about separation. They left that out of the most recent, which was still all the way from 2016. So again, we're stuck with the 2009 data, which is, again, they just have like one page of that whole report has anything to do with separation. And what they say on there is that the average separation based on census data is 0.8 to 1.1 years, which comes out to like 10 months to 14 months, something around there. The DHHS survey, I believe, had a similar number. It said about 50% of separations last a year or longer. So again, that gives you an idea that 1 year mark is somewhere in the middle of what most separations last. If you were just to ask me based on my anecdotal observations, my own experience, hey, Stephen, just off the top of your head, how long do you think most separations last? I think that 10 to 14 month range is probably about right. I personally might call it more like 14 to 16 months. I think separations last a bit longer than that average. I don't see very many, not none, but most separations I see last at least a year. So again, not that there aren't exceptions. There are plenty of exceptions, and there are plenty that do kind of fall in that 9 or 10 month range. But still, quite a few last over a year, and certainly we have plenty of students in Peace and Control. I've had plenty of clients who would measure their separation in years, not months. So even though I would probably put my average as a little bit on the longer side of what we get from the data, either way, it's safe to say that separations are almost always measured in months. Sometimes they're measured in years, but they're almost always measured in months, definitely not in weeks. So with that in mind, with that baseline set, let's start looking at factors that I believe influence the duration of separation and questions that I would ask someone who's asking me, how much longer will my separation last? As I was thinking about how I can help you answer this question for yourself, I identified what I think are 7 strong indicators or strong factors that I would be looking to figure out if I were having a one-on-one conversation with you. These are questions that I would ask you to help determine where you are at in your separation. So I'm just going to pose these questions to you now and give you a little bit of information on each one. And hopefully that will help you figure out and kind of brace yourself, okay, I have a lot more journey left, or hey, maybe I'm getting closer than I thought. The first question, pretty obvious one, which way is the separation currently going? Are you still headed towards divorce? And if so, how adamantly is your wife pursuing divorce? Has she filed yet? Is there been any real legal work done, or is it just still a vague concept that she's stated she's pursuing? Maybe she was very adamant towards divorce, but now she's become a little bit uncertain. She's not as adamant about it. You've noticed some kind of mixed signals from her. So you're kind of in no man's land, and you're uncertain of which way your separation is headed. That's true for a lot of guys. Or maybe you're headed towards reconciliation. And maybe she's even said, yeah, I'm ready to work on things, but you're not quite all the way at that point of being reconciled. Just divorce is not the default option anymore. And again, in each of these things, there's a spectrum, she can be very heavy-handedly moving towards divorce with great determination, or with the reconciliation. Again, there's a spectrum there. She can be jumping in with both feet, or she can be kind of more like something between uncertain and headed towards reconciliation. So again, recognize that this is a bit of a spectrum, but that's kind of what the question is for you here. Where are you on that spectrum? Is she very adamantly towards divorce, more like she's uncertain, or is she headed towards reconciliation? And again, if she's headed towards reconciliation, you might ask yourself also, how long has it been since she kind of turned that corner back towards reconciliation? And how far towards divorce did she go? Did she move out? Did she file? Is there or was there an affair? These sorts of things are additional hurdles that you'll need to overcome. And that actually brings us to the next question that I would ask, which is, where is she living? What's the living situation? Is your wife still living at home? This is really a pragmatic question more than anything else, because the reality is, if your wife has moved out, or if you've moved out and you're living separately, then it just takes longer to get back to normal from where you're at. Now, it kind of goes both ways. If you believe that your separation is still headed for divorce, then if your wife is still living at home, that probably means that you are still earlier in your separation than if she had moved out, right? Because most of the time, moving out happens before divorce is filed. Not always, but most of the time that's kind of the order of operations. On the flip side, if she's on the way back and she's moved out, again, you have a longer runway between where she's at and the endpoint that you think you're headed towards of reconciliation. So again, you kind of look at the answer to question one, okay, and then is she still living at home, and how does that line up with the things that remain to be done between where you're at and this marriage crisis being finished? If she wants divorce and she's still living at home, it's going to take longer to get to divorce. If she is leaning towards reconciliation, but she moved out, it's going to take longer to get to reconciliation. And then the inverse of both of those is true as well. So, okay, we had two really simple, really kind of obvious questions. Which way is the separation currently going? And is she still living at home? Now we're going to get into one that might be a little bit more difficult to answer, but I think it's a good one to think about nonetheless, which is, does her change in attitude about the marriage correlate with the work that you've done in the separation? In other words, have things gotten better at the same time that you've been making improvements in yourself? Does it seem like there's any connection there? Does it seem like you've had any impact on your wife's desire for divorce? And I suppose this also could go the other way. Maybe, you're not quite far enough into your separation that your wife has had time to notice your changes and to see any positive impact from those, but you did notice that at the start of the separation, you made some big mistakes that really made things a lot worse. So again, you're noticing a connection between your actions and her perception of the marriage, not in a good way, but nonetheless, what we're looking for here is how much influence do you have, right? And again, you might say, well, actually, my wife has been very consistent this whole time. She's completely cold about it. It doesn't really matter what I do, for better or for worse. Her attitude about divorce is the same. Okay, so then again, that means that you're going to have likely less influence over the duration of this process. The next question that I would ask you is, where's the trust at? And are there any signs that it's rebuilding? Trust is almost always the first thing that needs to come back into a marriage relationship before love and romance can regrow. There has to be some trust. And the reason for that is because the regrowth of love and romance and affection and those good feelings that your wife wants to have in the marriage and feels like she needs to see in the marriage, to get those feelings requires making a leap of faith and allowing yourself to be vulnerable in the marriage relationship, in the new marriage relationship. And so if your wife does not yet have trust in you, if you have not rebuilt trust with her, then she's not going to be willing to make that leap of faith, even if she realizes that that's what she needs to do. And again, there's oftentimes some amount of time between her kind of letting go of her desire for divorce and then trusting you enough that she actually dives back headfirst into the marriage and lets herself open up to you again. Those are two separate things. It's not just enough for her to stop wanting divorce. she also has to start wanting the marriage and meaningfully investing herself in it. So again, in my view, trust is one of the most important things to be looking at. And if you have noticed increased trust with your wife, that's a good sign, and a sign that maybe you're drawing closer to the point where your wife can either reconsider divorce if that's still the track that she's on, or jumping in with both feet like we just talked about. Specific things that I would be looking for that indicate rebuilding of trust in the relationship would be vulnerable conversations that your wife is willing to have with you. Being able to resolve conflicts in a healthy way, which maybe you haven't been able to do previously in the separation or even in the marriage. If you can start resolving conflicts well to where you both feel satisfied after their resolution, again, that builds trust. If I see a wife who's starting to ask for help or is including you in parts of her life that she had barred you from previously, if I see a wife who is willing to admit her own personal weakness or personal responsibility for the separation, all of these things to me indicate that the trust is moving in the right direction inside the relationship. So if you are seeing any of these things in your separation, then hey, maybe you are seeing some regrowth of trust. Now, this next question is really going to be reserved for men who are either in that uncertain category or they're outright headed for reconciliation. And that question is, on what level can you love her? This is probably the most important question if you are trying to figure out how much longer until your wife is back. You've seen the start, the beginnings of a reconciliation. It feels like you've really legitimately started to turn that corner, and your wife is, she's no longer just moving towards divorce. That is not her primary outcome that she's pursuing. She's now opened up in some way, in some form, to reconciliation. Or maybe you're still in that uncertain camp and she's not there yet, but you're starting to see that you can pour your love into your wife in some ways. And so that's what this question is addressing. On what level can you love her? In what way can you love her? Is the limit of how you can express your love to your wife right now just as a friend? Is that the limit? Or maybe you can go a little bit past that. You can express your love to her as a friend would, but you can also be a little bit verbally affectionate with her. You can tell her she looks good. You can thank her for something that she's done for you and let her know how much that means to you. You can kind of have those sorts of interactions. Maybe you can even go past that. Can you show any amount of physical affection to your wife? Or is she still at the point where she just doesn't want to be touched? Can you, even if it's just, holding a hand, brushing the arm, side hug, do you get any of that from her, or are you able to give any of that to her? And I guess the step past that would be outright courtship, right? And again, obviously, if you're headed back, you're on your way back to a happy marriage, and you're at the point where you can just plainly court your wife, that's a pretty good sign that you're getting close to the finish line. Again, that's the question that we're trying to figure out here. How much more room is there in the marriage for you to express the full scope of your love for your wife? How limited are you in that? How close are you to being able to express the full scope of your love to your wife? What is left to do? That's what we're trying to figure out with that question. This next question is going to be kind of the inverse, and this is going to be, well, I guess it's also true for men who are kind of between that sort of uncertain and headed towards reconciliation point in their separations. But the question is, how comfortable is she? This is, without a doubt, the most important question for anyone who's sitting in no man's land or limbo land or that place of uncertainty where you legitimately have no idea which way this separation is going to go. This is also true for the man whose wife still wants divorce. Because the simple reality is that a more comfortable wife has less motivation to change her present circumstances. That's one of the reasons why letting go and embracing the let her go mindset almost always slows things down at the start of a separation. It almost always slows her momentum towards divorce because it helps your wife feel comfortable. Now, obviously, her feeling comfortable is a bit of a double-edged sword because It also means that your wife has less motivation to do the hard work of divorce. That's a good thing. She doesn't feel like she needs to do that, but it also means that she has less motivation to address her own responsibility or pursue her own personal change in the separation. So that's why I will see the wife going through an identity crisis. If she feels uncomfortable, you will continue to see probably increasingly destructive or detached behavior from her. But if she feels comfortable, she doesn't need to push as hard against the marriage. But again, she also doesn't have the same impetus to get help. The wife going through an affair doesn't feel the need to divorce, but she also feels like she has her cake and gets to eat it too. And so there's no reason to alter either relationship that she's participating in. The wife who's going through the loss of love is more content to simply focus on her new single life. There's no affair, there's no midlife crisis, she just wants out. Well, if she feels comfortable, then she's not going to feel like she needs to get the divorce right now. She's going to be okay just enjoying separated life or getting used to it and finding the things that she enjoys about it, which again can be a good thing to slow down the divorce, but comes at the cost of perhaps your wife gets used to being disconnected from the marriage. So again, it's a double-edged sword, this comfortable question, but the one thing that it does do for you is that it almost always gives you more time. So that's the question that you're asking here. How comfortable is your wife? The more comfortable she is, usually the longer your separation is going to last. So take that as you will. Again, the inverse of that is true. The less comfortable your wife is, the shorter your separation will probably be because she wants to get out of not only the marriage, but also the separation. My final question, and this applies to everyone, and that is, what are the potential infinite obstacles in your marriage or in your wife's life? These are internal obstacles on her end that prevent her from making progress in the separation. These are things that she and she alone has the ability to address, to influence, to process through. And progress in the relationship can't happen until she does so. So let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. These would be things like residual childhood trauma, any sort of mental health issue, whether that's depression, and an identity crisis might fall in this category, but certainly like anxiety, bipolar, narcissism, anything like that. Or if she's, again, identity crisis, or if she's just generally unmotivated, she's just not doing well. Certainly I saw a lot of wives who would fit that description over this past year with the lockdowns and stuff. There were a lot of, not just wives, men too, lost motivation, lost discipline, just weren't doing well emotionally or mentally. And again, you're not going to be able to do the hard work of divorce, and it is hard work. It's time-consuming work that you have to really force yourself to do. You're not going to be able to do that if you're not in a strong place mentally, and not very many people are right now. If there's a personal history with divorce, if her parents or her friends or her other family members, or she's been in a previous marriage, any of those things can sort of be an infinite obstacle that can bar progress in the separation, certainly towards reconciliation, but sometimes even towards divorce, until she addresses them. And the reason I call them infinite obstacles is because these are the things that almost always, whenever I see like a separation that has lasted for like years, one of those really long ones, almost always I am seeing at least a couple of these sorts of internal obstacles on her part. So to be clear, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a counselor, I'm not encouraging you to medically diagnose your wife or anything like that. Instead, again, for the sake of this question of how much longer is your separation going to last, one of the things that you ought to know can really affect the duration of your separation is if you have any of these sort of infinite obstacles on your wife's part. Things that will slow things down indefinitely until they're addressed, and your wife is the only one who can address them. Any or all of these factors can contribute to the duration of a separation. Any or all of these factors can help to distinguish between the separations that are going to last 8 months versus the ones that last 2 or 3 years. So let's review these questions. If you want to see a list of these questions for yourself, go to husbandhelphaven.com/how much longer with a hyphen between each of those words. So it's how-much-longer. And I'll have the outline of this podcast episode, not quite a transcript, but kind of the outline that I used to record from here. And that will have the question listed on there. So you'll be able to go, and if you just need kind of a cheat sheet for some of these factors, or if you want to go back and review, go check that out. I think it will be helpful for you. But like I said, the factors, the 7 of them that we looked at today. First, I asked you, which way is the separation currently going? Which direction is it heading towards? And with what sort of momentum? Second, is she living at home? And how does that relate to what she currently wants? If she's still living at home and she wants divorce, you're going to be in for a longer separation. Or at least it's going to be longer from now until you're done. And then the inverse of that is true. 3, does the change in her attitude have any correlation with your actions as a husband? Or has she been coldly consistent throughout? 4th, where is the trust at right now? Has there been any sign that it's rebuilding? 5th, and this is the most important question for a man who believes he's headed towards reconciliation, on what level can you love her? How much of your love can you express to your wife, and in what way? How much of it must be guarded? That's the question. 6, this is the question that is important for everybody, but probably most important for the men who are still heading towards divorce or who are stuck in no man's land with uncertainty of the outcome, and that is, how comfortable is she? And then finally, what are the potential infinite obstacles that will keep her from making any progress towards divorce or reconciliation until they are addressed? With all of that being said, to me, this how much longer question is actually not as important as the question that we're going to ask on next week's episode. Because ultimately, and this is what I say in Peace and Control, it doesn't matter how long your separation will or won't take to run its course. What really matters is how long and through what you are willing to wait. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in the next episode. So, in the meantime, if you haven't already, like I said, I encourage you, go visit husbandhelphaven.com. I recently released a new, completely free resource that I think is an excellent starting point for anybody who's dealing with separation or marriage crisis. It's called From Separated to Reconciled in 7 Steps. And it's a completely free but very in-depth guide that walks you through the sort of bird's eye overview process that your marriage needs to go through to get from the point of her saying, I want out, to her saying, let's work on things. And if you're a new subscriber, when you sign up for that, you'll also receive additional email lessons helping you to kind of take action on that process and figure out what parts of that process you can drive forward. If that sort of thing sounds helpful to you, again, go check it out. husbandhelphaven.com. Right there on the homepage, you'll see where you can sign up for it. Go check it out. Either way, thanks for listening to the Husband Help Haven podcast. And as always, signing off with much manly love. This has been Stephen. I'll see you guys next week.